The men of the 53rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry faced enemy fire for the first time on the morning of April 6, 1862 at the Battle of Shiloh. As the story is usually told, the 53rd Ohio fired about 2 collective rounds before retreating in the face of a large Confederate force. The regimental commander, Colonel Jesse Appler, yelled, "Save yourself! There's no place for us here," and the 53rd was ordered to retreat. Following the battle, General William Tecumseh Sherman, who had been with the 53rd when the first Confederate soldiers emerged from the trees, he had a very harsh rebuke of the regiment and their performance in the early stages of the Battle of Shiloh. This rebuke wounded the pride of the men of the 53rd Ohio. And even though Sherman would later in the Civil War go on to have extreme praise for the men of the 53rd, his rebuke and criticism for their performance, and even the charge of cowardice in the face of the enemy, stung the pride of the men of the 53rd, and following the war, they took to the printed newspapers in their local area and the National Tribune to clear their names from these charges. Sherman never backed down from these charges because William Tecumseh Sherman was also being accused of being taken by surprise on April 6, 1862. The 53rd Ohio had told William Tecumseh Sherman that Albert Sidney Johnston's force was on the move and coming closer to the Union line. But Sherman rebuked the 53rd Ohio's intelligence reports and told Colonel Appler to take his regiment back to Ohio because he is too scared. The debate that played out in the newspapers between Sherman and his supporters and the men of the 53rd has never been subjected to scholarly treatment. This debate in the role of pride and honor in the service of Union soldiers, especially from Ohio, has been neglected in the overall historiography of the 53rd Ohio and the Civil War. Not only that, outside of a regimental memoir by John K. Duke of Company F of the 53rd Ohio, the regiment has never been subjected to a full-length book about its war service. The 53rd Ohio does appear in works about William Tecumseh Sherman and the Battle of Shiloh, but they are usually just presented as a part of the opening round of the battle. And the early historiography of the 53rd presents them in a very negative light. It is not until the early 2000s that a more complete picture is shown in the historiography, that the 53rd Ohio did perform properly before the battle, but failed in the face of the enemy. In order to understand the 53rd Ohio and the Battle of Shiloh and the importance of the regiment to the battle and the overall war, an examination of what led to the war and why these men signed up for the war in Ohio is necessary and has been neglected. Not only does the debate between Sherman and the men of the 53rd hold tremendous importance to unlocking this story, the conditions in Ohio, southern Ohio, which did not necessarily go overwhelmingly for Lincoln in the election of 1860, is important to examine to fill in the gaps of the historiography of not only the 53rd Ohio, but the state of Ohio in the Civil War in the West. The 53rd Ohio is also important to examine at the Battle of Shiloh because it is reflective of the larger problems facing the Union Army in the West. There are supply issues. There are problems feeding the soldiers. The 53rd train without the proper weapons before they are just thrown into battle. The 53rd is a microcosm of the larger problems facing the Union Army in the West. All of these issues have been neglected by scholars and historians. By examining the 53rd Ohio at the Battle of Shiloh, we can not only see whether Sherman failed or the 53rd failed in the initial fighting near the Shiloh Meeting House, but we can also see what motivated the people in Ohio to sign up to fight in a civil war in an area that did not necessarily, in the southern portion of Ohio, support Abraham Lincoln. And we can also find out how the 53rd is representative of the larger problems facing the logistics of fighting a war against a rebellion in the West.